To one person it's a crisis, to another it's a job.
Look, you're not really hurt, are you?
He's let people down, kept patients waiting. I want to know what was so important. It's private.
But a moment's neglect can put a life on the line.
Look at my baby. You did this.
The Best of Casualty continues Wednesday at 8 on BBC One.
I used somebody's real name for one of my made-up names entirely by accident.
Una.
That's my flat, Nick. It's been bugged.
Are you in on this, you little?
What you mean there, on the mate?
Got a lawyer, myself, and 3 other people.
Bang!
All waiting to eliminate someone called Pygmalion.
If you drop this in it, you're not gonna like the look of your face no more.
It's got it all wrong.
The plot darkens in Dennis Potter's Karaoke in 15 minutes on BBC One.
So now the news on BBC One with Peter Sissons.
Israel and Hezbollah exchanged blows once more for the first time since last month's ceasefire. Israeli jets bombed guerrilla bases in southern Lebanon after an attack on an army patrol. The Florida Everglades have swallowed up the wreckage of the aircraft in which 109 people died. And thousands line the streets of Manchester as United bring home the silverware. Tensions have flared again in southern Lebanon as Israeli warplanes and artillery attacked suspected Hezbollah targets in retaliation for a Hezbollah attack on an Israeli patrol. 5 Israeli soldiers were injured when their vehicle was ambushed. Israel accused Hezbollah of disrupting the peace deal.
The wounded Israeli soldiers were evacuated for treatment. Hezbollah warned it would go on attacking Israelis in the strip of Lebanese land they occupy, and it's kept its promise. Israel accepts these attacks do not violate the ceasefire that ended its Operation Grapes of Wrath 2 weeks ago, because that only stopped attacks on civilians. But it says Hezbollah is disrupting the ceasefire because its response could escalate into something much more serious.
We have our right and our duty to defend our forces, and we'll take every action necessary to do so. And we will chase the Hezbollah, and we will make sure it will not disrupt the peace there.
Israeli aircraft retaliated, firing missiles at suspected Hezbollah bases. Israel's Prime Minister Shimon Peres faces a general election at the end of the month. His campaign advertisements claim that he's the only man who can deliver a peaceful and secure future to young Israelis. But the opposition says the latest attacks prove the claims he's making on television are nonsense, that Operation Grapes of Wrath failed because Hezbollah can still hit Israelis. Today's attacks remind voters here that Israel has unfinished and dangerous business in South Lebanon. The Prime Minister Shimon Peres has only a narrow lead in the opinion polls. If there are more Israeli casualties, it will be reduced. Israel's troops were patrolling South Lebanon today just as they have for 18 years. The government says it has made Israel's northern frontiers more secure, but it accepted a ceasefire that allows Hezbollah to attack military targets. The government is in a bind of its own making. Jeremy Bowen, BBC News, Jerusalem.
Rescue teams in Florida say they've called off the search for survivors from last night's plane crash. They're now trying to find out why the aircraft crashed in the Everglades shortly after leaving Miami. More than 109 people were on board.
From the start, emergency workers warned searching the desolate swamp of the Florida Everglades where the DC-9 jet went down would be fraught with difficulty. The only signs of a crash were brown scorch marks and black oily pools where the shattered plane disappeared into the muddy water. Using helicopters and airboats, rescue workers scoured the area, and divers had to brave alligator-infested waters made further hazardous by spilled aviation fuel. In the end, they concluded finding anyone alive was unlikely. One man who failed to make the flight now can't believe his luck he missed it.
I lost $1 in the vending machine. And I said, I'm having a bad day, I missed my flight. I lost $1 in the vending machine. They said, no, you're the luckiest man alive.
The question now is whether to build a pontoon bridge across the marshland or even drain the site to haul out the bulk of the wreckage. But federal investigators hope first to recover the plane's flight data and voice recorder, which may provide clues to what happened. The DC-9 plane was 27 years old and had suffered several safety problems, and it's not the first time ValueJet's cut-price operation has been questioned. Last June, one of its planes caught fire, and this winter there were several minor runway accidents, both prompting safety investigations. But the US Transportation Secretary insisted ValueJet had cooperated fully and satisfied federal inspectors.
We believe that the low-cost airlines and the other airlines have comparable safety records. If they were not safe, we would not let them fly.
At the crash site in the Everglades, though, officials said it was far too early to tell what might have caused the disaster, and the process of retrieving the wreckage would be long and tedious. Bridget Kendall, BBC News, Washington.
Here, the Labour Party is recommending a ban on all semi-automatic rifles and handguns following the Dunblane killings. They want to remove 300,000 weapons from circulation. But the Home Secretary, Michael Howard, said he'd wait for the outcome of Lord Cullen's inquiry before deciding what action was needed.
The Labour plan is for a drastic clampdown on guns. They want to see a ban on all handguns and semi-automatic weapons which can fire more than once without reloading. They want the minimum age for a firearms certificate raised and the police to be given greater powers to refuse a licence. Labour politicians insist the fundamental question for any new law should be why people need guns.
There are too many handguns and rifles in circulation. It's too easy to get hold of them, and the consequence of that is that members of the public are too often placed in danger from these weapons.
Those who run gun clubs reacted to the proposals with fury. They accuse Labour of an overreaction which threatens the future of their sport.
The effect on the gun clubs will be to totally annihilate them. I think very few people will continue to shoot with single-shot guns, and it is totally unfair to blame one very law-abiding segment of society for the actions of one madman.
The Prime Minister has promised to legislate on the control of semi-automatic weapons in the autumn, but the government is waiting for the outcome of the Cullen inquiry into Dunblane before deciding how far to go. Ministers were insisting today they hadn't been beaten to the punch by Labour.
It would be extremely foolish to ask Lord Cullen to look at all these things and to preempt his inquiry and to say, we've asked you to look at all these things, but we're not going to wait for you to look at them. We're not going to wait for your conclusions. We're going to preempt them and legislate now.
But with one set of gun control proposals on the table, there is now a very real danger of this issue slipping into party politics. Matthew Emery-Waller, BBC News.
A ship carrying nearly 4,000 refugees fleeing the civil war in Liberia has finally been allowed to dock at a port in Ghana. Many of the refugees are sick with dysentery and fever. The freighter left the Liberian capital Monrovia more than a week ago. She was turned away after emergency repairs at San Pedro in Ivory Coast. And when she first tried to dock near Takoradi in Ghana, massive floating cranes were used to block her path. Fighting broke out on board and shots were fired, but the Ghanaian authorities later allowed the ship into harbour.
The ship that no one wanted at last headed for port, carrying frightened and desperate people. Conditions on board were dreadful and disease had broken out.
We know that one woman died overnight of hemorrhage, and we have had contact with a doctor, a Liberian doctor on board, and he tells us that there are a lot of cases of severe diarrhea. There is